Summer is upon us, and that's the perfect time to do another advertising retrospective. To beat the heat, we're going to need some help from Kool-Aid Man. How did this enormous, wall-breaking picture come to be? Well, that's what I'm here for. We're going to take a comprehensive look at the life and times of this boisterous hero. Kool-Aid as a product has been around since 1927, but Kool-Aid Man didn't appear until 1954. And even then, he wasn't quite the character we know and love. Instead, he was a proto-Kool-Aid Man called Pitcher Man. Artist Martin Potts was inspired by his son drawing smiley faces on frosted windows, as many of us have as kids. The first known ad featuring Pitcher Man focused mostly on a live-action mother and a group of neighborhood kids. Pitcher Man sang a few lines of the jingle with them. I don't believe the original voice actor has ever been credited, but some following commercials had him voiced by the unmistakable Thurl Ravenscroft. In some early 60s commercials, two boys called the Kool-Aid Kids would travel the world. No matter what amazing sights they saw, they could only think of Kool-Aid. Luckily, the commercials reveal that the whole world loves Kool-Aid as much as them. A chorus of familiar pitchers would join in, singing the praises of Kool-Aid. I was going to make a joke about closed-minded American tourists, but the kids seem to crave Kool-Aid even at an American ski lodge in the middle of winter. Maybe they just really have an obsession with the drink. They're not called the Kool-Aid Kids for nothing. After this, the commercials pulled out the big guns with animation superstar Bugs Bunny coming on board. Elmer Fudd was also present, acting as Bugs' foil. A few commercials even had Bugs drawing the Pitcher Man's face himself. When he wasn't competing with Fudd over Kool-Aid, Bugs was hanging out with kids. For instance, he would lead them in a far-out dance, the Kool-Aid Cool. It's about as endearingly dorky as you'd imagine. Other ads had Bugs finding a lonely kid. He would suggest serving some Kool-Aid, which would inevitably attract a group of friends. Friends who are only interested in you because you have Kool-Aid, but beggars can't be choosers. There were even some spots filmed with the monkeys acting as the lonely people, with Bugs using the same Kool-Aid solution. Hanging out with Bugs Bunny and the monkeys? Whatever. Wait, they're serving Kool-Aid? Why didn't you say so? I'm there! The Kool-Aid proved to be so desirable, it even attracted kids from another planet. Such is the power of a good flavored drink mix. Although Pitcher Man was present in most of these commercials, he was more of a prop than a character. Granted, that's kind of how he was from the start, but it was even more noticeable with Bugs Bunny and the monkeys in the spotlight. But all that would change in 1975. He would be Pitcher Man no longer. Kool-Aid Man was ready to make his grand entrance. In these iconic commercials, kids would be doing some sort of physical activity. Hiking, bowling, skating. They would of course feel hot and thirsty. With a bellow of, "Hey, Kool-Aid!" the summoning ritual was complete. Kool-Aid Man would be there in an instant, with a mighty, raspy, "Oh yeah!" If they were inside, he'd smash through the wall. Even if they were outside, he'd find something to break through. The "oh yeah" and the wall smashing are still his defining traits. Even after that property damage, Kool-Aid Man often left some sort of mayhem in his wake. Most people in these commercials didn't seem to realize they were actually in an advertisement, and reacted with appropriate shock to the Red Giant. The best part of these commercials, to me at least, is the clunky costume. It looks incredibly hard to move in, and it's a lot of fun to watch the poor guy inside struggling to hit his marks. It really doesn't look like he has much control of what he's doing. We salute you, unknown performer. We do know his voice actor, however. Kool-Aid Man was voiced by Richard Berg in these commercials. Berg also wrote the catchy jingle that Kool-Aid Man sang. In 1978, Kool-Aid Man became more of an openly heroic figure for the first time. Kids would run afoul of pirates, bank robbers, and other dastardly foes. Of course, as commercial characters, they were chiefly concerned with wanting a drink. Kool-Aid Man would make his usual entrance, either defeating or befriending the bad guys, and giving everyone Kool-Aid. What couldn't he do? Well, his mouth couldn't move, but not for long. By the early 80s, Kool-Aid Man was given an animated mouth to properly sing his jingle. One commercial from this era had him drop in through the ceiling, rather than crashing through a wall. This seemed to be a one-time thing. Whatever that pitcher's made of, it must be strong. In 1983, Kool-Aid Man would receive his first recurring foes. He is the personification of a thirst quencher, so it's natural that the villains he opposed would represent thirst itself. And none did it better than the Thirsties. A monstrous race resembling little suns, the Thirsties never appeared in any commercials to my knowledge, but they battled Kool-Aid Man in 2 video games and 3 comic books. Just like Kool-Aid Man exists to help others, and more importantly, push that almighty product, the Thirsties seem to exist for the opposite reason. They delight in causing misfortune, especially if it leaves someone feeling, well, thirsty. The Adventures of Kool-Aid Man ran for 9 issues. The first 3 were published by Marvel, with Archie Comics taking over for the later issues. In the first issue from 1983, we get to see what Kool-Aid Man's busy schedule is like. His battle against the Thirsties is a never-ending one. Our hero lives in a pitcher-shaped house, what else, and uses a supercomputer to monitor the world for the Thirsties' nefarious schemes. In the first story, he stops the Thirsties from ruining a baseball game with fiendish pranks. The second story has the Thirsties attacking an amusement park with an enormous Thirsty referred to as the Giant Thirst Monster. Kool-Aid Man deduces that he's actually a hologram, which doesn't make that much sense to me, but whatever. This is when computers were seen as strange magical devices that could do anything, so there are some things you just have to roll with. The Thirsties' leader, Big Thirsty, has had enough of Kool-Aid Man's interference, and orders his underlings to take care of the hero once and for all. I would joke about how Big Thirsty is a pretty uncreative name for the main villain, but Kool-Aid Man's name is, well, Kool-Aid Man, so there you go. Kool-Aid Man, who wears a perpetual grin throughout the story, ends up wandering into a rocket ship, accidentally blasting himself into outer space, and defeating the Thirsties in their own mothership. It's all pretty bonkers. I haven't even mentioned Kool-Aid Man's friends, a group of kids who are all one-dimensional and insufferable. It's entertaining, mostly for the wrong reasons, but that's better than being bland. As I said, 1983 also saw Kool-Aid Man fighting the Thirsties in 2 video games, both simply called Kool-Aid Man. The Intellivision game had kids trapped in a haunted house chased by Thirsties. They needed to gather the ingredients for Kool-Aid to summon Kool-Aid Man. Once our hero arrived, he was able to fight the Thirsties head-on. The Atari game, meanwhile, had the Thirsties trying to drain Kool-Aid Man's pool. I'm glad the instructions clarify that these floating orbs are Thirsties, because I would have no idea otherwise. The Thirsties returned in a second Kool-Aid Man comic. After spoiling a 4th of July barbecue, the creatures hijack a time machine and head back to 1773. Their plan is to steal all the tea in Philadelphia. Not only will everyone be thirsty, but the American Revolution will be stalled, meaning no more 4th of July barbecues ever. I'll give them credit. The Thirsties know how to up their game. Kool-Aid Man is left with no choice but to also travel back in time and set American history back on the correct course. Pride and Prejudice and Zombies? Please. Johnny Tremaine and Kool-Aid Man is where it's at. A second story has the Thirsties disrupting a camping trip and kidnapping a few of Kool-Aid Man's friends. 2 out of 5 stars, not enough Benjamin Franklin. The third comic, published in 1985, featured the final appearance of the Thirsties. Big Thirsty pulls out the big guns this time, creating a device called the Computerror, capable of controlling every computer on Earth and in space. The drastic implications are acknowledged, but Kool-Aid Man assures everyone that they're still more annoying pests than actual threats.
Big Thirsty isn't doing this for power or money. He just wants to spoil everyone's fun.
Now that the stakes have been sufficiently lowered, Kool-Aid Man reveals his own plot to stop the bad guys before they can wreak any havoc. He challenges Big Thirsty to a video game contest, and is able to take out all the Thirsties while their leader's distracted. Remember kids, video games are bad for you, unless they star Kool-Aid Man. The issue's other story is one of the most interesting ones, since it introduces a slew of new characters who are barely seen anywhere else. In this one, several families are competing in a balloon race around the world. The Thirsties, as always, try to sabotage it. They seem to be aware that this is their final appearance, because this is the only story where they actively try to kill people. The competitors all have their balloons popped in midair and plunge into the abyss. Each of them are saved by a Kool-Aid Man. That's right, I said a Kool-Aid Man. We meet the Punch Bunch, 4 new pitchermen who look almost identical to the one we know and love. The only difference comes from their color and accessories. The optimistic Rainbow Punch is burgundy and carries a pitcher with a rainbow extending from it. Mountainberry Punch is magenta, or purple in some artwork, and carries mountaineering gear. He also yodels, "Yodelay, oh yeah!" Sunshine Punch, the most visually distinct, is orange and wears sunglasses. Finally, Tropical Punch is a slightly lighter shade of red who wears a Carmen Miranda-style fruit hat. In the actual commercials, from what I've seen, Kool-Aid Man advertised the flavors himself as opposed to the Punch Punch characters. The idea of living in a world with multiple Kool-Aid Men is weirdly unsettling. After this, the Thirsties were never seen again. You might run across a few on dating sites, but they're a lot less organized than they used to be. Around 1986, Kool-Aid commercials took a turn for the wacky. Admittedly, the whole idea of Kool-Aid Man smashing through walls was already pretty wacky, but these commercials put that into overdrive. Director Robert Scholar was given full creative control and wanted to do something akin to Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer music video or Pee-wee's Playhouse. Something fast-paced and random for the MTV generation. Kool-Aid Man was still present in these commercials, but a lot of focus was also put on kids having fun and being silly. In a lot of ways, it was the very essence of summer. In 1987, Kool-Aid Man received a new foe to replace the meddlesome Thirsties. Scorch, a sunglasses-wearing living flame, was introduced for a story arc in the commercials. He steals the key to Kool-Aid Man's special vault, where he keeps all the toys and prizes kids can send away for. He hides somewhere in the Kool-Aid Kingdom, and kids could use a special map to track down his location. The Punch Bunch actually got to make a rare appearance on the map. The idea of a magical kingdom full of colorful locales based on Kool-Aid flavors was most likely swiped from McDonaldland. The search for Scorch was adapted into the 4th issue of Kool-Aid Comics, now being handled by Archie Comics. We get to learn a little bit more about our new fiery villain here. Just like the Thirsties, Scorch exists to spread misery and thirst, making him a natural enemy of Kool-Aid Man. Scorch leaves a trail of obvious hints for Kool-Aid Man to follow, all while boasting that he's far too smart to be caught. A poor man's Riddler if I ever saw one. Scorch is tracked to his ramshackle hideout, where he hangs out in a hot tub. Hot water is A-okay, but cold liquid is another story. Kool-Aid Man drenches him in what else but Kool-Aid, which seems to have an almost acidic effect on Scorch. In the 2nd story, Scorch tries to sabotage a surfing contest. It's no surprise that he ends up losing to Kool-Aid Man. The Kool-Aid Vault would be upgraded the next year into the Wacky Warehouse. The commercials continued to go in the wacky direction, but now they had a central area they could put the action in. The warehouse wasn't just a place to store prizes, it was now the ultimate hangout for Kool-Aid Man and his friends. The 5th issue of Kool-Aid Man's comic focused on the grand opening of the Wacky Warehouse. Scorch naturally tries to make trouble, but ends up thwarted as usual. Speaking of Scorch, he wasn't the only new character added around this time. Once again, taking a page from McDonald's playbook, Kool-Aid Man received a number of colorful friends to represent the different Kool-Aid flavors. Let's face it, the Punch Bunch weren't memorable, given that they all looked virtually identical to Kool-Aid Man. He needed variety. The Cool Pops were a group of singing popsicles to represent Kool-Aid's frozen output. Sharkleberry Finn was a laid-back pink shark that wore sunglasses, the epitome of cool. Then there's Crocodile Red, a red saxophone-playing crocodile who definitely gave Sharkleberry a run for his money. Purplesaurus Rex was a big, purple, friendly dinosaur. No, the other one. Pink Flamingo was a surfer dude flamingo. My personal favorite was the Great Blue Dini, an octopus that magically turned green powder into a blue drink. It seemed to be the only trick he knew, which I'd imagine got monotonous and monochromatic, but no one seemed to mind. Incrediberry did the same gimmick, turning yellow to red. He was a flying glob of liquid who carried himself with the air of a superhero. If only we could all be so confident. It seems that most of these characters only showed up in 1 or 2 commercials each, but they were prominently featured on the packaging of each drink. They also starred in the final set of Kool-Aid comics. Issue 6 had Scorch steal Kool-Aid Man's formula for a new flavor. The villain jumps into a time machine because the Wacky Warehouse has everything. Once again, Kool-Aid Man chases a fiery foe into the past. Deja vu in the truest sense. They end up in prehistoric times where they meet Purplesaurus Rex. The dinosaur scares off Scorch, retrieves the formula, and joins Kool-Aid Man in present day. Because of this, Kool-Aid Man names the flavor after his new friend. 3 out of 5, still not enough Benjamin Franklin. Unfortunately, the final 3 issues seem harder to come by. All we know from their covers is that they featured Sharkleberry Finn, Crocodile Red, and the Great Blue Dini. Around this time, in 1994, Kool-Aid Man changed, and I don't mean his design. He wore clothes more frequently, yes, but he'd been occasionally donning outfits since the 80s. No, the biggest change was that for a long period, he stopped bursting through walls. It's crazy, right? Kool-Aid Man breaks down walls. Everyone knows that. And yet, for many kids who grew up in the 90s and onward, you were more likely to see Kool-Aid Man knocking down a wall in Family Guy than in an actual commercial. Why was this? No idea. I doubt anyone was trying to imitate him in real life. Maybe they were just trying to go in a different direction with the character. In 1995 and 1996, Kool-Aid Man took a little break. A series of commercials aired that featured concerts. Different flavors of the drink were represented by different bands. A human MC led the show, with Kool-Aid Man sometimes making a silent appearance. At this point, Kool-Aid Man was referred to as the Big Man. As the 90s continued, Kool-Aid Man came back into the spotlight, now voiced by Frank Sims. He was a more laid-back guy here, cruising around in his car, inviting us all to party with the Big Man. Since it was the late 90s, he also got into extreme sports. It was sort of obligatory. At this point, a CGI character could do the stunts that someone in a costume could never pull off. In the early 2000s, Kool-Aid Man traded his wacky warehouse for a fancy mansion. Like the warehouse, it was the location of an eternal party with plenty of Kool-Aid to spare. Kool-Aid Man at this point had become something of a Willy Wonka figure, showing off his new flavors himself rather than having his old animal buddies do the work. Starting around 2008, the CGI character was replaced with someone in a costume, harkening back to the 70s. Kool-Aid Man received a new foe in these commercials, Soda Man. Unlike the Thirsties and Scorch were actively malicious, Soda Man was just cold and incompetent. He could never measure up to Kool-Aid Man. The commercials, of course, were meant to show Kool-Aid as a better alternative to soda. His voice actor in this period was Pat Duke. 2013 showed us a new side of Kool-Aid Man, now voiced by Keith Hudson. In a few commercials, he's portrayed as a normal guy who just happens to be a giant pitcher. This finally confirmed the age-old question of whether or not Kool-Aid Man was the pitcher or the liquid within. And for the first time in years, he burst through a wall. Yes, it was by accident, but it counts. The most recent years have more or less returned Kool-Aid Man to his roots from the 70s. He's now shown as a party animal, who bursts through walls and shouts, "Oh yeah!" more than ever. He's gone through a few more voice actors in this period as well, Matt Howell and Scott Golden. It's always fun to see how these advertising campaigns and their characters change over time. We've seen this guy grow from Bugs Bunny's accessory to a force of nature that nothing can stop. Not Scorch, not the Thirsties, and certainly not any wall. What will the future hold for our hero? Time can only tell. Let's raise a glass of your favorite flavor and toast to the one, the only, Kool-Aid Man. Oh yeah.
It's just not right.
Hmm?
Why do they gotta say don't drink the Kool-Aid, huh?
Well, isn't it 'cause at Jonestown they all drank...
No, that's not what they drank at Jonestown.
Oh, okay.
You know what they drank? Flavor-Aid. They drank a Kool-Aid knockoff, and we get the blame. What kind of world is this?
I mean, I've heard that there might have also been some
It
Kool-Aid.
was Flavor-Aid.
It was Flavor-Aid. So does that saying hurt business?
No, just my feelings.